I still remember the exact moment I knew something was deeply wrong. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, the kind of evening where the London sky hangs low and gray, threatening rain that never quite arrives. I was sitting in my office on the 14th floor of Thornton Construction's headquarters, the building I had designed myself 31 years ago when it was nothing more than a sketch on the back of a napkin. The city stretched out before me through floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lights blinking to life as darkness settled over everything I had built. And there, reflected in that glass, I saw my daughter's face hovering behind me, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was only there for a moment, gone so quickly I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But I hadn't. That look, cold, calculating, patient, would haunt me for months to come. Because in that fraction of a second, I glimpsed the stranger wearing my daughter's face. The stranger who had been planning my destruction for years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how my own flesh and blood, the child I had sacrificed everything for, the daughter I loved more than my own life, could become my greatest enemy, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to when I was just Maggie Thornton, a 27-year-old widow with a baby girl, 43 pounds in my bank account, and absolutely nothing to lose. My husband, Thomas, died when Claire was 18 months old. A construction accident. Ironic, given what my life would become. He was working on a high-rise in Birmingham, filling in for a friend who had called in sick. The scaffolding collapsed. They said he died instantly, which was the only mercy in the whole terrible thing. I was 26 years old, alone, with a daughter who would never remember her father's face except from photographs. Those first months after Thomas died exist in my memory as a blur of grief and terror. I had no family to speak of. My parents had died years before, and I was an only child. Thomas's parents blamed me somehow for his death, though I never understood why, and they cut us off entirely. So it was just me and Claire against the world, and the world felt impossibly large and hostile. I had been working as a secretary at a small construction firm before Thomas died. After the funeral, after the tiny life insurance payout that barely covered our rent for 6 months, I went back to that job because I had no other choice. But something had changed in me. Grief does that. It either breaks you completely, or it forges you into something harder than you were before. For me, it was the latter. I started paying attention at work in ways I never had before. I listened during meetings. I studied the contracts that crossed my desk. I asked questions that annoyed my bosses, but taught me everything I needed to know about how construction companies actually operated. Within 2 years, I had saved enough money to take night classes in business management. Within 4 years, I had my contractor's license. And at 31 years old, with a 5-year-old daughter watching me with those big, trusting eyes, I registered Thornton Construction as an official company. Claire was there for all of it. She was there when I signed the paperwork in a cramped solicitor's office that smelled like mildew and old coffee. She was there when I landed my first contract, a small residential renovation in Croydon that made me a profit of exactly 400 pounds. She was there when I worked 18-hour days, falling asleep at the kitchen table with blueprints spread out before me, waking to find that she had covered me with a blanket and left a glass of water by my hand. That was my Claire. Thoughtful, caring, the kind of child who noticed when her mother was struggling and tried, in her small ways, to help. I used to watch her sleep and promise her silently that I would give her a better life. A life where she would never know the fear of an empty bank account or the humiliation of wearing clothes with holes because there was no money for new ones. I promised her that everything I was building, every sacrifice I was making was for her, and for 25 years I kept that promise. Thornton Construction grew slowly at first, then faster still. By the time Claire was 10, we had moved from our cramped flat in Lewisham to a proper house in Greenwich. By the time she was 15, we had offices in 3 cities. By her 20th birthday, Thornton Construction was one of the most respected mid-sized construction firms in the United Kingdom, with contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds and a reputation for quality that I had earned through decades of refusing to cut corners. I gave Claire everything: the best schools, holidays abroad, a car for her 17th birthday, a flat in Chelsea while she studied business at the London School of Economics, my choice, which she embraced with what I thought was genuine enthusiasm. I wanted her to have the education I never had, to start where I had arrived rather than where I had begun. And she was brilliant, my daughter, top of her class, praised by every professor. I still have the letters they sent me, glowing reports about her analytical mind, her leadership potential, her natural talent for understanding complex financial systems. I framed one of them and hung it on my office wall, right where I could see it every day. My greatest accomplishment, I used to think, wasn't the company at all. It was her. Claire joined Thornton Construction when she was 24, immediately after completing her MBA with distinction. I started her at the bottom, despite protests from some board members who thought the founder's daughter should have a corner office from day one. I wanted her to understand every aspect of the business. I wanted her to earn her place, the way I had earned mine. She worked in procurement for a year, then project management, then finance. She never complained. She smiled through long hours and difficult colleagues and the occasional client who underestimated her because of her age or her gender. I was so proud of her. So blindly, completely, devastatingly proud. The day I promoted her to vice president of operations was one of the happiest of my life. She was 29 years old, and the announcement was made at our annual company gala in front of 500 employees, clients, and industry leaders. I remember taking the microphone and looking out at that sea of faces, searching until I found hers at a table near the front. My daughter, I said, my voice thick with emotion, is not being promoted because she is my daughter. She is being promoted because she has proven time and again that she is exactly the leader this company needs for its future. Thornton Construction was built on a foundation of hard work, integrity, and loyalty. Claire embodies all of those values. I could not be more proud to stand here tonight and announce that she will be taking on expanded responsibilities as we continue to grow. The applause was thunderous. Claire stood, elegant in a navy dress that matched her eyes. Thomas's eyes, I always thought, and made a brief, gracious speech about being honored by my trust in her. When she sat down, I saw her glance toward a table in the back corner of the room, just for a moment. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Later, I would learn that Victor Ashford had been watching from that table. Victor Ashford, CEO of Ashford Development, our biggest competitor. Victor Ashford, who had been trying to acquire Thornton Construction for years. Victor Ashford, who had apparently been meeting with my daughter in secret for nearly 12 months by that point. But I didn't know any of that then. Then I was simply a mother watching her daughter shine, believing that everything I had worked for was safe in the hands of the person I loved most in the world. The first cracks appeared so slowly that I didn't recognize them for what they were. It started with small things. Claire began missing our weekly Sunday dinners, always with perfectly reasonable excuses. Work commitments, meetings with clients, a headache, a previous engagement she had forgotten about. I understood. I had been the same way when I was building the company, after all. Success demands sacrifice. Then there were the closed doors. Claire had always had an open door policy in her office, something I had insisted on years ago. Transparency was one of our core values. But now increasingly, when I walked past her corner of the floor, her door would be shut. And through the glass walls, I could see her on the phone, speaking intensely about something, her brow furrowed in concentration. When I asked about it later, she would wave it off. Supplier negotiations, difficult subcontractors, nothing I needed to worry about. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. The financial irregularities were harder to dismiss. Harry Whitmore, our chief accountant and one of my oldest friends in the business, came to my office one afternoon looking more troubled than I'd ever seen him. He was a slight man, Harry, with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual air of gentle worry. But that day the worry had sharpened into something closer to fear. "Maggie," he said, closing the door behind him. "I need to talk to you about some discrepancies I've found." I put down my pen and gave him my full attention. "What kind of discrepancies?" He sat across from me, clutching a manila folder like it was a life preserver. "Money moving. Specifically, significant sums being transferred between accounts in ways that don't quite match our standard procedures. The authorizations are all proper, at least on paper, but the patterns are unusual." "Unusual how?" Harry hesitated. I could see him wrestling with something, trying to decide how much to tell me. Over the past 18 months, approximately 3 million pounds has been moved through a series of shell accounts connected to a subsidiary I've never heard of. The paperwork is impeccable. Every signature is where it should be. But when I tried to trace where the money ultimately went, I hit a wall. My first instinct was to reassure him. Claire has been expanding our supplier network, I said. She mentioned working with some new vendors. Perhaps this is related? Perhaps. Harry didn't sound convinced. But Maggie, some of these authorizations, they have your signature on them. I felt the first flutter of something cold in my chest. My signature? Dated from times when I know you were out of the country. That trip to Scotland last March, for instance. There's a transfer authorization dated the 15th with your signature, but you weren't even in London that day. In London. I stared at him, my mind racing to catch up with what he was implying. There must be a mistake. Someone must have misdated the paperwork. Maybe, Harry said, but his eyes told me he didn't believe it. I should have investigated immediately. I should have called Claire into my office that very hour and demanded an explanation. But instead, I made the mistake that would cost me nearly everything. I rationalized. I made excuses. I told myself that Harry was being overly cautious, that there had to be an innocent explanation, that my daughter, my Claire, my golden child, could never be involved in anything improper. Keep looking into it, I told Harry, but quietly. I don't want to alarm anyone unnecessarily. He nodded and left, and I sat alone in my office as the sun set over London, telling myself I had nothing to worry about. 2 weeks later, Harry had a heart attack. He survived, but barely, and the doctors insisted he take early retirement. I visited him in the hospital, bringing flowers and trying to hide my fear behind a cheerful smile. The files, he whispered, gripping my hand with surprising strength. I made copies. Everything I found, they're in my personal safe at home. Just in case, Maggie, just in case. I patted his hand and told him to rest. At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. With Harry gone, Claire personally selected his replacement, a young man named Marcus Webb, fresh from a prestigious accounting firm with excellent references and an eager-to-please attitude. He reported directly to Claire, which made sense given her role in operations. I saw no reason to question the arrangement. That was my second mistake. The third mistake happened at the Christmas party that year. I was making my rounds, shaking hands and making small talk, when I found myself near the bar, standing next to Dennis Callahan. Dennis had been with me since the very beginning. He was the first foreman I ever hired, a bear of a man with hands like shovels and a heart as big as the rest of him. He had never quite learned to be comfortable at fancy corporate events, and I often found him hiding near the food or the drinks. Hell of a party, Maggie, he said, raising his glass. Thanks to Claire, she organized the whole thing. Something flickered across Dennis's face, just for a moment, there and then gone. Aye, she's good at organizing things, that one. I looked at him more closely. Dennis, is something wrong? He took a long drink, seeming to wrestle with himself. Then he shook his head. Nothing at all. Just an old man being suspicious of change, that's all. Change? Some of the lads on the cruise, they've been talking. New suppliers we've never heard of. Materials that don't quite match the specs we ordered. Corners being cut in ways we never used to allow. He held up a hand before I could respond. Nothing dangerous, mind. Nothing that would put anyone at risk. Just different. And some of the older guys, the ones who've been around since the early days, they've been quietly encouraged to take early retirement packages. I felt that cold flutter again, stronger this time. Who's encouraging them? Dennis wouldn't meet my eyes. Nobody specifically, it's just the way things are going. The culture's changing, Maggie. Might be nothing. Probably is nothing. Like I said, just an old man being resistant to new ways of doing things. I thanked him and moved on, but his words stayed with me. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself at my home office computer, logging into the company's internal systems for the first time in months. I had delegated most of the day-to-day oversight to Claire, trusting her to keep me informed of anything important. Now scrolling through reports and memos and financial summaries, I felt a growing sense of unease. There were projects I didn't recognize, contracts I had never approved, staff changes I had never been consulted about. My company, my life's work, was shifting beneath my feet, and I hadn't even noticed. I picked up my phone to call Claire, then hesitated. It was nearly midnight. She would be asleep. And what would I even say? I found myself unable to articulate my suspicions, even to myself. It was just a feeling, after all. Just the paranoia of a woman approaching 60, perhaps afraid of becoming obsolete. I put the phone down and went to bed. And I told myself, again, that I had nothing to worry about. The board meeting in February should have been routine. Quarterly results, future projections, the usual administrative matters. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit, and found the conference room already occupied. 6 of my board members were there, including 3 I had personally appointed over the years. They fell silent when I walked in, which was strange. Normally there would be chatter, jokes, someone asking about my weekend. Claire arrived 5 minutes later, looking polished and professional as always. She kissed my cheek and sat at my right hand, which was her customary position. "Before we begin," said Robert Hartley, one of the longest-serving board members, "there's a matter we need to discuss that isn't on the official agenda." I raised my eyebrows. "Oh?" Robert shifted uncomfortably. He was a banker by trade, a careful man who chose his words with precision. "Margaret, all of us here have tremendous respect for what you've accomplished. Thornton Construction wouldn't exist without you, but—" He glanced at Claire, who nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. "But times are changing. The industry is evolving. And some of us feel that perhaps it's time to consider a transition in leadership. A gradual transition, of course. Nothing abrupt. But the markets value fresh thinking, new energy." The cold flutter in my chest had become a block of ice. "Are you asking me to step down?" "Not step down, step back. Perhaps transition to a chairman emeritus role, advisory capacity. Let the next generation take the helm." Robert's eyes flicked to Claire again, and this time I caught it. This time I understood. I looked at my daughter. She was wearing an expression of gentle concern, the same expression she had worn as a child when she brought me tea while I worked late. But something behind her eyes didn't match the mask. "Claire," I said slowly, "did you know about this?" "Mum," she said, reaching for my hand, "nobody wants to force you out. We just want what's best for the company, for your legacy. You've worked so hard for so long. Maybe it's time to let yourself rest." "I don't need rest." "Of course you don't, but the board has concerns. The industry is changing, and some of our competitors are outpacing us. Fresh leadership could—" "Which competitors?" I interrupted. "Ashford Development?" Was it my imagination, or did Claire's composure slip just for a fraction of a second? "Among others," she said smoothly. "This isn't about any particular competitor. It's about positioning ourselves for the future." I looked around the table at the men and women I had worked with for years. Some wouldn't meet my eyes. Others watched me with a curious mixture of guilt and anticipation. And I realized, with a sickening lurch, that I had lost control of my own board without even knowing it. "I need time to think about this," and I said, standing. "We'll reconvene next week." I left before anyone could argue. And as I walked to the lifts, my legs steady through sheer force of will, I heard footsteps behind me. "Mrs. Thornton?" It was Marcus Webb, the young accountant Claire had hired after Harry's heart attack. He was holding a folder, his face carefully neutral. "Your daughter asked me to give you these, the latest financial projections for your review." I took the folder automatically, barely seeing it. "Thank you." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Mrs. Thornton, I just wanted to say, not everyone agrees with what's happening. Some of us remember who built this company." He glanced over his shoulder, then slipped something into my hand. A piece of paper, folded small. "For what it's worth." He was gone before I could respond. In the lift, alone, I unfolded the paper. On it was written a name and address. Rebecca Chen, corporate law, followed by the words, "Ask about Ashford. Ask about the subsidiary." I stared at those words all the way down to the ground floor. And for the first time since that October evening when I had glimpsed my daughter's reflection in my office window, I allowed myself to consider the unthinkable. What if Claire wasn't protecting my legacy? What if she was dismantling it? I didn't go to my office the next day. Instead, I drove to Harry Whitmore's cottage in Kent, where he was recovering from his heart attack. His wife, Patricia, greeted me with surprise and concern, but Harry seemed almost to have been expecting me. "She's making her move, isn't she?" he asked when Patricia had left us alone in his study. "I don't know what she's doing," I admitted. "But I need to see those files you mentioned. Everything you found before you had to leave." Harry nodded and, with some difficulty, retrieved a thick folder from a safe hidden behind a painting. "I should have told you more," he said. "I should have been clear about what I was seeing. But I didn't have proof, Maggie. I didn't want to accuse your daughter of something I couldn't prove." I sat in his study for 4 hours, reading through his documentation. £3 million was just the beginning. The shell companies he had traced led to other shell companies, an intricate web that seemed designed specifically to obscure the movement of money out of Thornton Construction. Some of the funds appeared to have gone to Ashford Development, payments disguised as consulting fees, vendor services, and equipment rentals from companies that, when Harry had investigated, seemed to exist only on paper. But worse than the money was the pattern Harry had noticed in personnel changes. Key employees, loyal employees, people who had been with the company for decades, were being systematically pushed out. Their replacements were all younger, all eager, and all, according to Harry's notes, connected in some way to individuals in Victor Ashford's orbit. "She's not just stealing money," I said slowly, as the full scope of what I was seeing began to crystallize. "She's hollowing out the company, replacing everyone who might be loyal to me with people who are loyal to someone else." "To herself," Harry said quietly, "or to whoever she's working with." I thought of Victor Ashford's table at the back of the gala, the glance Claire had thrown in his direction after my speech, the closed doors and secret phone calls, the push to remove me from leadership. She's going to sell us to Ashford, I realized. That's what this is about. She's been preparing the company for a takeover, and she's been preparing the board to push me out, so there's no one left to stop it. Harry nodded. "That's what I suspected. But Maggie, I still can't prove it. Everything she's done has been technically legal, or at least designed to look that way. The signatures on those documents look exactly like yours. If she's forging your authorization, she's doing it perfectly." I thought of all the times Claire had brought documents to my house for signing, casually sliding them across the table while we ate dinner, while we talked about her day, while I poured wine and laughed at her stories. How many had I signed without really looking? How many authorizations had I given my own daughter, trusting her completely, never imagining she would use that trust against me? The betrayal hit me in waves. First anger, hot and righteous, then denial. Surely there was another explanation. Surely I was misunderstanding. Then a grief so profound it left me breathless because I wasn't just losing my company. I was losing my daughter. I was losing the person I loved most in the world, the person I had sacrificed everything for, the person who had apparently been plotting against me for years while smiling at me over Sunday dinners. I drove home in a daze. Harry's files in the seat beside me, and for the first time since Thomas died, I cried until I couldn't breathe. But grief, as I said before, either breaks you or forges you into something harder. I had rebuilt my life once before from nothing, with a baby in my arms and 43 pounds to my name. I was not about to let my own daughter destroy everything I had created. Not without a fight. The next morning, I called Rebecca Chen. Her office was in a sleek building in the city, all glass and chrome and aggressive modernity. Rebecca herself was small and precise, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a manner that suggested she had seen the worst of human nature and learned to find it predictable rather than shocking. "Marcus Webb sent you," she said. When I had settled into a chair across from her desk, it wasn't a question. "You know Marcus?" "He was briefly engaged to my sister. The engagement ended, but we've stayed in touch. He's been worried about what's happening at your company for some time." "What do you know about it?" Rebecca steepled her fingers. "I know that Victor Ashford has been trying to acquire Thornton Construction for the better part of a decade. I know that approximately 2 years ago, your daughter Claire began having private meetings with him, meetings that weren't recorded in her official calendar. I know that several of my colleagues have been quietly hired by your company to handle transition planning, though they've been instructed to keep that work away from your attention. Transition planning? The betrayal hit me in waves. First anger, hot and righteous, then denial. Surely there was another explanation. Surely I was misunderstanding. Then a grief so profound it left me breathless because I wasn't just losing my company. I was losing my daughter. I was losing the person I loved most in the world, the person I had sacrificed everything for, the person who had apparently been plotting against me for years while smiling at me over Sunday dinners. I drove home in a daze, Harry's files on the seat beside me. And for the first time since Thomas died, I cried until I couldn't breathe. But grief, as I said before, either breaks you or forges you into something harder. I had rebuilt my life once before, from nothing, with a baby in my arms and 43 pounds to my name. I was not about to let my own daughter destroy everything I had created, not without a fight. The next morning, I called Rebecca Chen, the legal and financial groundwork for an acquisition, change of ownership documentation, asset valuation, shareholder agreements, all being prepared in advance so that when the moment comes, the takeover can happen quickly, before anyone with objections has time to mount a challenge. I felt sick. How quickly? Rebecca consulted her computer. Based on what I've been able to piece together, I would estimate you have perhaps 4 to 6 weeks before they're ready to move. Move how? What exactly is she planning? Your daughter has been quietly acquiring shares in Thornton Construction for the past 18 months, using shell companies to obscure her purchases. She now controls approximately 32% of the company. Combined with shares held by board members who have indicated they'll support her, and a commitment from Ashford Development to purchase any shares that come available at above market rates, she has enough votes to push through a merger whether you like it or not. But I'm the majority shareholder. I own 51% of the company. Rebecca's expression was carefully neutral. Do you, Mrs. Thornton? When was the last time you verified that? My blood ran cold. The documents Claire had brought for signing. The papers I had barely glanced at, trusting her completely. What had I signed exactly without knowing it? I need to see the company's current share registry, I said. The official documents, not whatever version Claire has been showing me. I can help with that, Rebecca said. But Mrs. Thornton, I should warn you, if your daughter has been planning this for as long as I believe she has, she's likely anticipated that you might eventually grow suspicious. Whatever documentation you find, whatever evidence you gather, you need to assume that she has a contingency plan. People who orchestrate betrayals of this magnitude don't leave things to chance. What kind of contingency plan? That's what we need to find out. Working with Rebecca and Marcus, who, I learned, had been documenting irregularities ever since Claire had hired him, I began to piece together the full scope of what my daughter had done. It was worse than I had imagined. Over the past 2 years, Claire had systematically manipulated the company's share structure. Through forged authorizations, fake buyback agreements, and a series of complex financial maneuvers that would have impressed anyone who didn't know they were fraudulent, she had reduced my actual ownership stake from 51% to just under 38%. The difference had been distributed among the shell companies she controlled, which meant that when the time came to vote on the merger, she could effectively vote my own shares against me. But that wasn't the worst of it. The shell companies that had been receiving funds from Thornton Construction weren't just holding companies for stolen money. They were suppliers, fake suppliers, with fake invoices, being paid for goods and services that were never delivered. Millions of pounds had been siphoned from the company under the guise of legitimate business expenses. And because Claire had carefully replaced anyone who might have noticed, the fraud had gone undetected for nearly 2 years. And there was more. In preparation for the merger with Ashford Development, Claire had been deliberately sabotaging Thornton Construction's most profitable projects. Delays were introduced. Key employees were reassigned to less important work. Client relationships were strained by poor communication and missed deadlines. The goal, as far as I could tell, was to drive down the company's value just before the acquisition, so that Ashford could buy us at a bargain price, and so that Claire, with her secret shares and her position in the new combined company, would profit enormously from the eventual recovery. She was destroying my life's work in order to sell the pieces to my competitor. And she was doing it all while sitting across from me at Sunday dinner, asking about my day, telling me she loved me. I spent 2 weeks gathering evidence, working in secret, trusting no one except Rebecca, Marcus, and Dennis Callahan, who had been horrified when I told him what I had discovered. Every night I came home to the house I had built for us, surrounded by photographs of Claire's childhood, and tried to reconcile the smiling girl in those pictures with the woman who was systematically stealing everything I had worked for. Some nights I nearly picked up the phone to call her, to ask her why, to give her a chance to explain, to apologize, to make this right somehow. But I always stopped myself because I knew that the Claire I wanted to call, the loving daughter who would never hurt me, didn't exist. Perhaps she never had. The hardest moment came when I found the emails. Marcus had managed to access Claire's private server, using credentials she had carelessly left logged in on a company computer. Among hundreds of messages between her and Victor Ashford, I found one that stopped my heart. The old woman suspects nothing, Claire had written 3 months ago. She's so desperate to believe I'm everything she wanted me to be that she can't see what's right in front of her. Honestly, it's pathetic. She built this company for me, she says. She sacrificed everything for me. And she never once asked if I wanted it. Never once considered that I might have ambitions of my own. Well, now I do. And when this is over, she'll finally understand what it feels like to be treated as a means to an end rather than a person. I read those words 100 times, trying to understand them. She thought I had treated her as a means to an end. She thought I had never considered her as a person. I had given her everything. Everything I had, everything I was, had been poured into giving her the life I never had. But as I sat there alone in my office at 2 a.m, I began to wonder if perhaps I'd given her everything, except the one thing she really wanted: a choice. I had decided she would join the company. I had decided she would take over someday. I had decided what her life would look like, and I had never asked if it was what she wanted. It didn't excuse what she was doing. Nothing could excuse this level of betrayal, this calculated destruction of trust and love and everything a family was supposed to be. But for the first time, I began to understand that my daughter wasn't simply a villain. She was someone who had felt trapped, controlled, unseen, and who had responded by becoming a monster. Understanding didn't make it hurt any less, but it helped me prepare for what I had to do next. The board meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday in March. According to the information Rebecca had gathered, this was the meeting where Claire planned to make her move. The merger proposal would be presented as a fait accompli, with the votes already secured. I would be offered a choice: accept a graceful retirement with a symbolic advisory role, or be publicly humiliated and forced out by a vote of no confidence. What Claire didn't know was that I had been working just as hard as she had. And I had learned a few things about corporate warfare myself. Over 30 years of fighting for every contract, every client, every inch of progress. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early, even earlier than usual, and found a familiar figure waiting outside the conference room. Victor Ashford, tall, silver-haired, with the practiced charm of a man who had spent his career convincing people to sell him things at a fraction of their real value. "Margaret," he said, extending his hand, "I was hoping we could speak privately before the meeting." "Were you?" I didn't take his hand. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited." Claire thought it would be helpful to have all stakeholders present for such an important discussion. Transparency, it's one of your core values, isn't it? I looked at him. This man who had been plotting with my daughter for years, who had helped her plan my destruction, and I felt nothing. No anger, no fear. Just a cold, clear certainty about what I was about to do. "Yes," I said. "Transparency is exactly what we need." I couldn't agree more. The boardroom filled gradually over the next 20 minutes. Claire arrived last, looking radiant in a cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly styled, her confidence radiating from every pore. She kissed my cheek as she passed, and I let her, keeping my expression neutral. "Shall we begin?" Robert Hartley asked when everyone was seated. "Actually," I said, standing before anyone could respond, "before we get to the agenda, there's something I need to share with all of you. Something that, I believe, changes everything about our discussion today." Claire's smile flickered. "Mum, perhaps we should stick to the schedule." "I've discovered," I continued, ignoring her, that over the past 2 years, this company has been the target of a systematic fraud. Millions of pounds have been stolen through fake invoices and shell companies. Our share structure has been manipulated through forged documents. Key employees have been pushed out and replaced with individuals whose primary loyalty is not to Thornton Construction. And all of this has been done in preparation for a hostile takeover by Ashford Development, orchestrated, I'm sorry to say, by my own daughter. The room erupted. Board members demanded explanations. Victor Ashford started to rise, his face darkening. Claire's expression shifted from shock to calculation to something hard and cold. The same expression I had glimpsed in her reflection all those months ago. "That's a very serious accusation," Claire said, her voice steady. "Do you have any evidence? Or is this just the paranoia of an aging woman who can't accept that it's time to step aside?" I had expected this. I had planned for it. Without a word, I opened my briefcase and began distributing folders, copies of everything Rebecca and I had compiled. Bank records showing the movement of money, documentation of the shell companies, including records linking them to Claire's personal accounts, copies of the forged signatures with expert analysis proving they weren't mine, emails between Claire and Victor Ashford detailing their plan in explicit terms. "And take your time," I said. "It's all there. 37 million pounds stolen over 24 months, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit a hostile takeover using illegally obtained shares." The room fell silent as board members flipped through the evidence. Victor Ashford's face had gone white. Claire was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, but something closer to fear. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "This is private correspondence, confidential financial information." "Obtained legally," I said, "with the help of counsel who specialize in exactly this kind of corporate fraud. And before you ask, yes, the relevant authorities have already been notified. The Serious Fraud Office opened an investigation this morning. They'll want to speak with you, Claire, and with you, Mr. Ashford." Victor Ashford was on his feet now, his charm evaporated entirely. "This is absurd. I won't sit here and be accused of E. You might want to call your lawyer, Victor." My voice was calm, almost pleasant. "The SFO can move quite quickly when they have evidence this comprehensive. I'm told they're already requesting freezes on several of your accounts." He stared at me for a long moment, something ugly flickering in his eyes. Then he turned and walked out without another word. The door slammed behind him so hard the windows rattled. I turned back to my daughter. She was still seated, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask. But behind the mask, I could see her mind racing, searching for an escape route, a countermove, anything to salvage what was left of her plan. "You can't prove any of this," she said quietly. "These documents could be fabricated. Those emails could be fakes. You've always controlled the narrative at this company, Mom. You think the board will just take your word for it? I'm not asking them to take my word." I looked around the table at the men and women who had tried to push me out just weeks ago. Some of them were already backing away, their loyalties shifting as they realized which way the wind was blowing. I'm presenting evidence. Evidence that can be verified by independent auditors, forensic accountants, and legal investigators. Your choice now is whether you want to cooperate with those investigations or whether you want to fight them every step of the way. "But Claire," I paused, waiting until she met my eyes. "I know you. I know how smart you are. You've been planning this for years, which means you've probably also been planning for the possibility that it might fail. There's an exit strategy somewhere. There's money hidden that I haven't found yet. There's a way out that you've kept in reserve." Something flickered in her expression. "Just for a moment. Here's what I want you to understand," I continued. "I'm not doing this to destroy you. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this because you left me no choice. You tried to take everything I built. Not to build something of your own, but to hand it over to someone else. You forged my signature. You stole from me. You manipulated people who trusted you. And worst of all, you did it while looking me in the eye and telling me you loved me. I do love you." The words came out flat, rehearsed. "You just never understood what kind of love I needed." "Maybe that's true," I admitted. "Maybe I pushed you into a life you didn't want. Maybe I was so focused on giving you opportunities that I never asked if you wanted them. If so, I'm sorry, truly. But Claire, what you've done isn't about escaping expectations. It's about greed. It's about wanting the rewards without doing the work. It's about taking shortcuts instead of earning your place. You don't understand anything about what I want, Claire spat, and for the first time, real emotion broke through her composure. You built this company on your grief, on your loneliness. You poured everything into it because you had nothing else. And then you expected me to do the same, to sacrifice everything, to work 18 hours a day, to make this my whole identity the way you did. But I wanted more than that. I wanted freedom. I wanted a life that wasn't defined by your expectations. Then you should have told me, I said quietly. You should have talked to me instead of betraying me. I would have listened, Claire. I would have helped you find your own path. You wouldn't have. Her voice cracked. You would have made me feel guilty. You would have talked about sacrifice and legacy and everything you did for me. And I would have stayed because I always stay, because saying no to you feels impossible. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and I saw the child I'd raised, the woman she had become, and the stranger she had chosen to be. 3 people in one body, each of them partially my creation. Maybe you're right, I said. Maybe I made you feel like you couldn't say no. Maybe I held on too tight. But Claire, you had choices. You could have left. You could have started your own company. You could have done anything you wanted. Instead, you chose to steal from me. You chose to lie to me. You chose to ally yourself with a man who wanted to destroy everything I built. Those were your choices, not mine. And now you have to live with the consequences. I gathered my papers, my briefcase, my coat. The board members watched in stunned silence as I walked toward the door. The investigators will be in touch, and I said, pausing at the threshold. I suggest you cooperate fully. If you do, there may be options for leniency. But Claire, I waited until she looked at me. I'm not protecting you anymore. Whatever happens next is entirely up to you. I left her there, in the boardroom of the company I had built from nothing, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal. And though my heart was breaking, though I wanted more than anything to take her in my arms and tell her we could fix this together, I kept walking. Because some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. And sometimes, love means letting someone face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences will change both your lives forever. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Claire was arrested 3 weeks after the board meeting. The charges included fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Victor Ashford faced similar charges, though his army of lawyers managed to delay the proceedings significantly. The merger obviously was canceled. Thornton Construction's stock price plummeted initially, then stabilized as news spread about how I had uncovered and stopped the conspiracy. I spent most of my time working with investigators, auditors, and lawyers, untangling the damage my daughter had done. It was painstaking work, emotionally exhausting, but necessary. Every document I reviewed, every meeting I sat through, I was forced to confront the extent of Claire's betrayal all over again. The media coverage was intense. The story of a mother exposing her own daughter's fraud was too dramatic to resist. I did one interview, early on, where I said only that I was heartbroken, but committed to protecting the company and its employees. I refused all others. I refused all. Dennis Callahan came to see me one evening, a month after Claire's arrest. We sat in my office as the sun set over London, and he told me about the projects we were getting back on track, the clients who had chosen to stay loyal, the employees who had never stopped believing in what we were building. You did the right thing, Maggie, he said. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you did. She's my daughter, Dennis. Whatever she did, she's still my daughter. And that's what makes it so terrible. But she made her choices. You didn't force her to do any of it. Maybe I did, though. Maybe I was so busy building this empire that I never asked if she wanted to be part of it. Maybe she felt like she had no options except the ones I gave her. Dennis was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, my dad was a coal miner. His dad was a coal miner. When I was 16, my dad told me I'd be a coal miner too. Said it was the family tradition. Said I owed it to him. He shrugged. I told him I wanted to build things, not dig for them. He was furious. Didn't speak to me for 2 years. But I did it anyway because it was my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone else live it for me. Claire could have done the same. She could have walked away, started over, built her own life. Instead, she tried to steal yours. That's not your fault, Maggie. That's hers. I wanted to believe him. Some days I almost did. The trial took place the following autumn. I was called as a witness, of course. Sitting in that courtroom, looking across at my daughter in the defendant's dock, I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Claire didn't look at me. Throughout my testimony, throughout the entire trial, she kept her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above my head, as if I wasn't there at all. Her lawyers argued that she had been manipulated by Victor Ashford, that he was the mastermind and she was merely a pawn. The emails we had recovered told a different story, but the strategy succeeded in shifting some of the blame. In the end, Claire was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and forgery. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Victor Ashford received 8 years. I didn't attend the sentencing. I couldn't bear to watch my daughter be led away in handcuffs. Instead, I sat in my office, staring out at the London skyline, and remembered the 18-month-old baby I had held in my arms on the day her father died. The little girl who had covered me with a blanket when I fell asleep at my desk. The young woman who had stood beside me at the gala, accepting her promotion, looking like everything I'd ever hoped she would become. Where had that girl gone? Had she ever really existed? Or had I simply been too blind to see who my daughter truly was? I didn't have answers. I'm not sure I ever will. The months after the trial were quiet. I threw myself into rebuilding the company, repairing the damage Claire had done, restoring relationships with clients and partners who had been affected by her schemes. Slowly, painfully, Thornton Construction recovered. We won new contracts. We hired new employees. We moved forward. I stepped back from day-to-day operations eventually, not because anyone pushed me to, but because I realized that I wanted something different from my remaining years. I appointed a new leadership team, people I trusted, people who had proven their loyalty, and transitioned to a chairman role that allowed me to guide the company's direction without being consumed by it. I started a mentorship program for young women in construction. I donated to charities that supported children of incarcerated parents. I tried in small ways to build something positive from the wreckage of my relationship with my daughter. I never visited Claire in prison. She never asked me to. Her lawyer contacted me once, about a year into her sentence, to say that Claire wanted to apologize. I declined the meeting. Not because I didn't want to forgive her. I did, desperately, but because I knew that I wasn't ready. Some wounds need time to heal before you can safely touch them. On the second anniversary of Claire's conviction, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Mum, it began, I've thought a lot about what I want to say to you. I've written this letter 100 times and thrown it away 100 times because nothing seems adequate. What I did was unforgivable. I know that. I knew it when I was doing it. I told myself you deserved it, that you had controlled my whole life, and this was my way of finally taking control for myself. I convinced myself that you would be fine, that you had plenty of money and could start over somewhere else, that it wasn't really hurting you because you had always been so strong. But I was lying to myself. I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew it would destroy you. And some part of me wanted that because I was so angry at you for making me who I am, for building a life for me that I never asked for loving me so much that I couldn't breathe. None of that excuses what I did. There is no excuse. I made choices that I can never take back, and I will spend the rest of my life living with those choices. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me if our positions were reversed, but I want you to know that I understand now, in a way I didn't before, what you sacrificed for me, what you built, what it must have cost you to expose me, to turn me in, to choose justice over love. You were right about all of it. I had choices and I made the wrong ones. Not because of you, but because of me. Because I was greedy and impatient and unwilling to do the hard work of building something of my own. Because it was easier to take shortcuts than to earn my place. I'm trying to be better. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'm trying. You don't have to write back. You don't have to visit. You don't have to do anything. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry for everything, Claire's. I read that letter sitting in my garden, surrounded by roses I had planted the summer after Thomas died 30 years ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the city sprawled out before me, its lights blinking to life one by one. I thought about everything we had lost: the Sunday dinners, the shared jokes, the dreams I had for her future, and the dreams she had for her own. All of it gone, burned away by betrayal and greed and choices that could never be unmade. But I also thought about everything that remained: a company that had survived its greatest crisis, employees who had kept faith with me even when my own daughter had not, a life that still had meaning, still had purpose, still had the capacity for growth and change and hope. I didn't write back to Claire that day. I wasn't ready. But I kept the letter. I folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer, next to a photograph of a baby girl with her father's eyes, looking up at the camera with a smile of pure, uncomplicated joy. Someday, perhaps, we would find our way back to each other. Someday, perhaps, the daughter I'd loved and the mother I'd been could build something new from the wreckage of what we had destroyed. Not the same relationship we had before, that was gone forever, but something different, something honest. For now, though, I had learned the hardest lesson of my life: that love is not enough to protect you from betrayal, and forgiveness is not something you can force. Both require time, both require choice, and both ultimately require a willingness to accept that the people we love are not always the people we believe them to be. I built an empire, and my daughter tried to bury me in it. She failed. I survived. And in surviving, I discovered that I was stronger than I knew. Not because I defeated her, but because I was willing to face the truth, even when the truth was more painful than anything I had ever imagined. That is my story. Not a story of victory exactly, more a story of survival, of learning to live with grief and betrayal without letting them define you.